and welcome to this exciting newscast about evolution. Today I want to set the stage for talking about how evolution works, what natural selection is, and how we can think about the biodiversity on the planet by means of evolution via natural selection. And I want to start off with a bit of a historical context. So starting with this man here, who you may recognize as Charles Darwin. Of course, Charles Darwin was the first person to at least publish the idea that species can evolve and become new species over time by the process of something that's called natural selection. As I'm going to talk about, there were other people that had the idea that natural life on the planet may evolve, but Darwin was really the first person to eloquently express the processes of natural selection, and he did that in his publication here called Origin of the Species by Natural Selection, which was published in 1859. And this was a really groundbreaking idea at the time because it challenged the notion that the Earth was populated by just a few species and that it was relatively young, maybe just 5,000 or 6,000 years old, as opposed to the fact that the Earth is actually closer to between 4 and 5 billion years old as we know today. Okay. Well, let's start even further back from Darwin and think about this historical context for, at least several hundred years before Darwin, if not more. And the Greek philosopher Aristotle, well, he and people of his time believed that species were permanent and that they didn't evolve. And since they were all put here by some great creator, they didn't need to change. They should be perfect just the way they are. The other thing that Aristotle looked at was the idea that you could arrange living forms on a scale of complexity, though, that there were some more simpler forms and that they got more complex, and he arranged this scale of nature. Now, at the time, Aristotle wasn't thinking about evolutionary trees, but what's really interesting is that his scale of complexity reflects a little bit the way some of our modern-day evolutionary trees look. Not entirely, but there's a lot of resemblance, which is really, really interesting. Okay. Well, fast forward to the mid 1700s or so, where the study of fossils really began to take form as a branch of science. And fossil scientists were really looking at the fact that there were species that were alive in the past that are no longer around today, and that these species resemble living species, but no longer on the planet. And this started people thinking, maybe the Earth is a little bit older than 6,000 years. Well, another person who's really important in thinking about the historical context for evolution is this guy Lamarck. Now, Lamarck is often remembered for being wrong about the ways in which species evolve, but he did have the idea that species changed over time and that they developed what are called adaptations. Now, his ideas were wrong because he thought that an organism could pick up a characteristic from the environment. Okay, say if you were a giraffe and you stretched your neck longer and longer and longer to try to reach the leaves on the tree, that you would therefore pass long necks onto your offspring. Okay, well, we know that evolution doesn't really work this way, but you have to give Lamarck a break because he really didn't know about things like genes. Of course, Darwin didn't really know about things like genes either, but many people of the time didn't really understand what we consider the mechanism of inheritance, and so he came up with this idea. And modern-day genetics, a subfield called epigenetics, means that Lamarck wasn't entirely wrong, although giraffes can't pass on long necks to their offspring that way. So, in setting our historical context here, we want to think about the fact that Darwin went on this journey on a ship called the HMS Beagle, and it took him 5 years to travel around the globe. And on this journey, he discovered many things. He collected fossils, he collected living organisms, and through this journey, he really developed his basis for the theory of evolution, or the fact of evolution, by means of natural selection. And we're going to talk more about that as we go along in this series.